Now we're talking.
You might have heard the news yesterday from the Northern Territory Police. There's a new cash reward. In fact, it's $500,000 for any information that could lead to the discovery of Peter Falconio's remains. Why do police use cash rewards, though? Are they successful? Is there a limit in relation to those cash rewards that is the ceiling, where people go, yeah, actually, I've got some answers that could aid this investigation? I had a chat to Dr Terry Goldsworthy. He's an associate professor in criminology at Bond University. He also has close to 30 years' experience as a detective inspector in the police force. Terry, why do police use cash rewards in the first place?
Yeah, look, traditionally rewards have been used when investigations become frustrated. So police have used their traditional methods, the tools they have, to conduct investigations. They haven't revealed a suspect, no one's been charged, etc. Then they will resort to a reward, because a reward will drive, the search for information. So the hope is that a reward will generate interest. There may be someone who has information but wasn't prepared to come forward. I guess we like to think that people would do the right thing for noble reasons and come forward with information about crimes. But in most states, there's no obligation legally for someone to do that. So you may have someone from a criminal background or for more dubious reasons doesn't want to come forward, but the potential to earn money by coming forward or gaining access to money could be sufficient for them to come forward and give that information to solve the crime.
Okay, so it's kind of like an incentive that benefits both parties, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it does. It incentivises someone to come forward. There's usually conditions around it in terms of it has to be a successful conviction or substantially assist the investigation. There's sometimes indemnifications attached to it, which don't include people who are what we call primary offenders. So if you assisted in the offence or were part of killing someone, etc., you may not be able to claim a reward, obviously, even if you're giving information to convict someone else. So there are limits around who can get it, how it can be issued. And even if you come forward to give information, it's up to the minister, usually in each state, to decide if they'll issue the reward based on the information given.
Right, okay. So you don't get the cash straight away. Like, it needs to lead to some sort of outcome, like remains found or a conviction, before you're actually even going to get a glimpse of the money at all.
Yeah, that's right. And, most of the rewards traditionally have been in terms of, generating information about suspects. There's not that many that are put out there in terms of locating remains. Usually it's like no one's been charged and we want information to try and find out who did charge them. So the one like Murdoch's one here of $500,000 to find the remains from the events of 2001 is probably one of the more unusual ones. We're seeing rewards being used in different ways now. Like if we look at the Chloe Smith abduction over in WA, the young 4-year-old girl who was gone for 19 days. I think it was only 4 days in and the police released a substantial reward over there. So it's how the tool is used. Rather than leaving it for 12 months down the track, they sometimes now come out within days. And that's all designed in some respects to put a lot of pressure on suspects, because suddenly, the reward generates media coverage, it makes people interested. Did I see something suspicious? I might ring up the police because I could get a reward. I might just be able to do that. So there's different methodologies in how they're using it. They may put a reward out there because they have a suspect but insufficient evidence, and whilst the reward is announced, they could have some covert methodologies going on in the background to see if it generates conversation, things like that as well.
Yeah, right, okay. So it is a really complex thing. A big decision, I'm guessing, Terry, to even decide to issue a reward in the first place?
Yeah, generally it has to be signed off by the minister. That's the case in Queensland anyway. So you have to put together a substantial report. I did one some years ago for a cold case where we found a fellow dead on the beachfront up at Main Beach down here on the Gold Coast, and it involved going through the evidence, highlighting that nothing had advanced in the years since, that there was no firm evidence against any suspects, and what the potential benefits of the reward may be. And then you have to nominate how much you think would be useful in terms of the amount, etc. Back then it was $250,000 was kind of like top of the line. whereas now we've seen rewards of $1 million or more come out straight away. So the amount's increasing, and, you know, that goes up the chain of command, and eventually we'll go to the minister, who on the advice of the commissioner will then go, yes, I'm going to issue that reward, and the reward notice is issued.
You're hearing from Dr Terry Goldsworthy this afternoon with me, Jess Ong, on 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin and the Northern Territory. Terry is an associate professor in criminology at Bond University. He's also had close to 30 years' experience as a detective inspector in the police force, talking about rewards and whether they actually yield results off the back of the announcement yesterday from the Northern Territory Police that they've upped the reward for information that leads to the discovery of murdered British backpacker Peter Falconio's remains. Mr Falconio, as I'm sure you know, went missing near the remote NT town of Barrow Creek back in 2001, but his body's never been found. So just announcing yesterday the reward of $500,000. And look, I mean, Terry, such an interesting conversation to delve into. Does the higher the money mean something as well? Like you said, you know, in the case of 4-year-old Cleo Smith, who disappeared from her family's tent in a WA campground, 6 days after she went missing, the state government announced a $1 million reward. So does the amount of money reflect the level of interest in the case, the eagerness to get results?
Yeah, it does. And, you know, I mean, the unfortunate thing is when you look at the amounts is that some people have got rewards of $250,000 on unsolved murders of their loved ones, and that was one of the criticisms in the Chloe Smith one, is people going, well, why is there only $250,000 on my nephew, my uncle, whatever, who was murdered 5 years ago, but he put $1 million out now? So that can be problematic. But, you know, I guess, you know, times change. You know, the value of money changes. What was once a big amount isn't seen as that big anymore. So perhaps there needs to be some kind of, you know, going back and looking at those amounts and elevating them all to the same level to make sure that we value all victims the same. I think it's important. That was the gist of what I think the criticism was, that if someone's high profile or if they're young and vulnerable, etc., do they suddenly become a more, I guess, likeable or more victim, more attracted to media attention than someone who perhaps doesn't generate that interest, but they should all get the same exposure and benefit of the system.
So then, I mean, with cash rewards, do you think they are going to be around for a long time? There's something that will be utilised by the police in the hopes that it does yield results. I mean, how frequently do these rewards bring forward fresh evidence or, you know, answers to where remains might be? Are they generally successful?
Look, you don't see too many in murders. I think they're probably the exception. But, you know, rewards cover a whole gambit of offences. So, you know, Crime Stoppers puts out rewards, low-level rewards, etc. Then you have the government rewards. There could be rewards put out by police services, different layers of rewards. You know, I got some data from the Queensland Police a number of years ago, and I think it covered a 5 or 6 year period, and they paid out about 150 rewards there that totalled over $1 million. So I think the biggest amount I saw was in relation to homicide, and that was about $50,000 they paid out. So even if you provide some information to a homicide investigation that assists, etc., you may not get all of the reward. You may get part of the reward. So that's another aspect that's of interest too. So, you know, you could have 500,000 advertised, but your information, whilst it did contribute, wasn't perhaps the most major thing that helped, so you might only get $50,000 of the reward.
Jess Ong with you this afternoon. Such an interesting chat with Dr Terry Goldsworthy. He's an associate professor in criminology at Bond University. He was a detective inspector for almost 30 years, talking about rewards and whether they are the incentive that the police need. And I mean, one thing you did mention earlier, Terry, is, you know, it needs to be quite robust. Like, you need to have outcomes before you receive the reward. But, you know, how difficult can it be to verify evidence that people are coming forward with? Like, that could take years potentially.
Yeah, it could. I don't think you'd be getting paid out in a matter of months. It would be a substantial period of time. You know, where you may see a quicker payment is, for example, we had a young girl killed on the beach in North Queensland here, and the alleged suspect had fled overseas to India. They then issued a reward in relation to his location. So they knew who he was. They just couldn't find him. So information came forward within a matter of weeks, I think, or days, in terms of that he was located and extradited back. Now, that reward would probably be paid out much quicker because they've located him. There's no issues in terms of successful conviction or anything like that. The reward was built around the location of the suspect. So depending on what the reward's aimed at, what particular kind of action result you want out of it, could determine how quick the payment is made as well.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, Terry, where does the money come from? Is it always taxpayer dollars? Is there like a budget assigned within the police force that is where reward money is allocated?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure the budget inside the police. There would be some money there if they're going to be police-issued rewards. Otherwise, this comes from government consolidated revenue in terms of the ministers' awards that are issued. Crime Stoppers have their own funds, and there are obviously people put up private rewards. You know, I think there was a high-profile one was Pink, I think, lost a couple of her dogs, or some actress over in Hollywood, and put out a reward for her dogs and got the 2 dogs returned. So, you know, members of the public put out rewards as well for information or return of things that may be precious to them.
And I'm also guessing that rewards really help in terms of just how social media news travels on social media these days as well. Like, you know, it's got traction. There's pickup there if there's a reward mentioned, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it does. It generates substantial media interest, and then that's traditional media outlets. And then, of course, we have the social media aspect of communication in our modern society today. So the police service, etc., is operating in those areas, and Instagram and Facebook and whatever else, Twitter. So all of those kind of avenues will also have the information about the reward put forward there. So it just amplifies the message of what the police are trying to do, and that kind of search for information just gets broadcast much more widely than it used to.
That was Terry Goldsworthy, an associate professor in criminology at Bond University. He was a detective inspector for almost 30 years in the police force, talking about the news yesterday from Northern Territory Police that there is a new cash reward, $500,000, in fact, for any information that could lead to the discovery of Peter Falconio's remains. Bradley John Murdoch, who was convicted of murdering Mr. Falconio in 2005 and remains in prison, has never revealed the location of his body. Did hear from Alan in Darwin, who asked if someone is successful in receiving the reward, do they have to pay tax on it? That is a good question, Alan. Wingwoman Lara has looked this up, and she says, while some rewards, like lotteries and gifts, are exempt, this kind of reward, it's not really clear what would happen in this scenario. The best bet would be to declare it anyway. And look, that's if you get it in the first place. Like you heard Terry say, you might not get the full amount. You might just get a little bit, depending on the sort of information that you've revealed and the leads that it takes the investigation down. So you're not necessarily guaranteed the full amount, and you definitely do not get the full amount straight away as well. So interesting to hear about whether rewards really do work in incentivising people to come forward. It's 2:30 on 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin and the Northern Territory.